What if the husband who barely missed a deadly honeymoon flight never intended to be on it at all? Under bright blue skies, a billionaire bride smiled as cameras captured what looked like the perfect honeymoon departure beside a gleaming private jet. Within hours, that same aircraft would be reduced to wreckage, launching one of the most disturbing federal investigations in recent memory. No one applauding that farewell realized they were watching the opening moments of a carefully hidden tragedy. Florida, honeymoon departure. Amelia Brooks believed love had finally found her. She trusted the man holding her hand more than anyone else in the world. She had no way of knowing their goodbye would be the last moment she would ever see him. Victim, Amelia Brooks. Amelia Brooks wasn't famous because she chased attention. She became known because success seemed to follow every opportunity she touched. By the age of 39, she had transformed a modest investment company into one of America's fastest-growing financial firms, building a fortune worth billions of dollars. Yet people who truly knew Amelia rarely spoke about her wealth. They remembered her generosity. When families couldn't afford life-saving medical treatment, anonymous payments often appeared. When gifted students thought college was impossible, scholarships quietly changed their future. After hurricanes devastated communities across Florida, relief trucks carrying food, medicine, and supplies frequently arrived before television crews. Few people realized Amelia had funded many of those deliveries herself. She never wanted recognition. She believed kindness meant more when nobody was watching. Employees respected her. Neighbors admired her. Even security guards, cleaners, and receptionists remembered that Amelia greeted them by name. Money had never changed the way she treated people. Then, she met Jonathan Brooks. 2 years earlier, Jonathan entered her life with confidence and charm. He owned an aviation technology company specializing in private aircraft safety systems. He never appeared intimidated by Amelia's success. Instead, he listened. He noticed small details. He remembered conversations everyone else forgot. For the first time in years, Amelia felt loved for who she was, not for the fortune attached to her name. Friends watched her smile more often. Family members believed she had finally found someone worthy of her trust. Their relationship remained remarkably peaceful. No scandals. No public drama. No warning signs. When they married, the ceremony reflected Amelia perfectly. Elegant. Private. Filled with lifelong friends, close family, and employees she considered part of her extended family. Everyone believed they were celebrating the beginning of an extraordinary future. No one imagined they might also be witnessing the first chapter of a tragedy. 1 week after the wedding, Jonathan surprised Amelia with an unforgettable honeymoon. A luxury trip aboard a privately chartered jet to an exclusive island resort. He planned everything himself. The aircraft, the route, the destination, every reservation, every detail. He smiled and told Amelia there was only one job she had. Relax. She laughed and joked with friends that it would be her first vacation without answering work emails. Nobody realized those words would later echo through an investigation that would consume federal agents for months. Because Amelia had placed complete trust in the man she loved. Inside the charter company's headquarters, CEO Charles Bennett personally approved the honeymoon flight. That immediately caught the attention of several employees. Charles almost never handled individual bookings. Senior executives usually delegated honeymoon reservations to operations managers. Yet this one was different. Charles reviewed the paperwork himself. He made several private phone calls. He approved unexpected scheduling changes. He requested revisions without explaining why. Nothing violated company policy. Nothing appeared criminal. But months later, employees admitted they couldn't stop thinking about one question. Why had their CEO become personally invested in one couple's honeymoon? Charter company CEO, Charles Bennett. Back at the private airport, pilot Hunter Lawson completed his final cockpit checks. Maintenance supervisor Aaron Pierce signed the inspection log. Airport operations coordinator Isabella Flores confirmed the departure schedule. Everything appeared flawless. The aircraft had passed inspection. The weather couldn't have been better. Ground crews watched as Amelia and Jonathan climbed the stairs together. Inside the luxurious cabin, they laughed. They toasted their new marriage with sparkling wine. They held hands while admiring the bright Florida skyline through the oval windows. Amelia leaned against Jonathan's shoulder and whispered she couldn't wait to begin the rest of their lives together. Jonathan smiled. He squeezed her hand. For a brief moment, everything looked exactly like the beginning of a perfect honeymoon. Then, a flight attendant quietly approached Jonathan. His phone had received an urgent call. He apologized to Amelia before answering. Moments later, his expression changed. He ended the call and looked back at her. "There's an emergency meeting I can't ignore," he said softly. "I'll catch the next flight and meet you tonight. I promise." Amelia looked disappointed. Then she smiled. She kissed him goodbye. "I'll be waiting." Jonathan stepped off the aircraft just minutes before the cabin door closed. Ground crews assumed it was an unexpected business interruption. Nobody questioned it. The engines started. The private jet slowly rolled toward the runway. Jonathan stood on the tarmac, waving until the aircraft disappeared into the brilliant Florida sky. To everyone watching, he looked like a devoted husband forced to postpone the beginning of his honeymoon. No one suspected that goodbye would become the most important moment of the entire investigation. But one detail didn't add up. Months later, investigators would discover something impossible to ignore. The emergency business meeting Jonathan claimed had pulled him off the flight never existed. Departure day, Florida. The private jet climbed smoothly into the bright Florida sky. Inside the quiet cabin, Amelia looked out the window as the airport slowly disappeared beneath the clouds. She smiled to herself. Jonathan would be joining her later that evening. His unexpected business meeting had been disappointing, but she never doubted his promise. She even sent him one final text. "I'll miss you until tonight. Love you." Jonathan replied almost immediately. "Love you too. See you soon." Those would become the last words they ever shared. 47 minutes into the flight, Captain Hunter Lawson completed another routine radio check. Everything sounded normal. The skies remained clear. The aircraft maintained its assigned course. Flight attendants continued serving refreshments as Amelia relaxed, already making plans for their first sunset dinner together. Then, without warning, the cockpit stopped responding. Air traffic controllers called again. And again. No answer. Only silence. Contact lost. Emergency procedures were activated within minutes. Radar operators searched desperately for the aircraft signal. Rescue helicopters and search teams raced toward the Florida Everglades after an emergency locator beacon was detected. Hours later, investigators found twisted wreckage scattered across the wetlands. There were no survivors. America mourned the death of billionaire philanthropist Amelia Brooks. News networks interrupted regular programming. Friends struggled to believe she was gone. A husband's heartbreak. Jonathan Brooks arrived before television cameras with tears in his eyes. He told reporters he should have been on that flight. He described the emergency business meeting that had forced him to leave the aircraft moments before departure. Many called him the luckiest and unluckiest man alive. The public saw a grieving husband whose life had been shattered in a single afternoon. No one questioned his story. Not yet. But one detail didn't add up. As investigators secured the crash records, NTSB investigator Evelyn Monroe noticed something unusual. A last-minute change had been entered into the flight's departure records. It hadn't been requested by the pilot. It hadn't been authorized by Amelia. Someone else had approved it. At first, it seemed like a routine administrative update. But that single change would eventually lead investigators toward a truth far more disturbing than anyone imagined. 3 days after the crash, America was still mourning Amelia Brooks. Television stations replayed images of her wedding and honeymoon departure. Most people believed the tragedy was a heartbreaking accident. But NTSB investigator Evelyn Monroe wasn't convinced. One fact refused to leave her mind. The aircraft had passed every required inspection. The weather had been nearly perfect. Captain Hunter Lawson had an exceptional safety record. Nothing about the flight should have ended in disaster. So, what had everyone missed? A small change. A big question. As investigators reviewed airport records, Operations Coordinator Isabella Flores pointed out something unusual. The honeymoon flight's departure schedule had been quietly modified less than an hour before takeoff. The change looked minor, almost routine, but it hadn't followed the company's normal approval process. No one could explain who gave the final authorization. That single alteration redirected investigators toward the private charter company. Detectives questioned charter company CEO Charles Bennett. He remained calm. He insisted the flight had been handled like every other charter. He denied making any unusual decisions. At first, his explanations sounded believable, until investigators compared his interview with internal company records. The timelines didn't match. It wasn't a major contradiction, just a few missing minutes, a few unanswered questions. But experienced investigators know major cases often begin with very small inconsistencies. Something was being hidden. As Evelyn Monroe reviewed the files once more, another question surfaced. Why had Jonathan Brooks received his emergency business call only minutes before departure? At the time, it seemed like nothing more than terrible timing. Investigators couldn't prove otherwise. Not yet. But for the first time, the possibility emerged that Amelia Brooks' honeymoon hadn't simply ended in tragedy. Someone might already know exactly why it never reached paradise. Financial records reviewed. While aviation experts searched the wreckage for answers, financial crimes investigator Thomas Reed looked somewhere else. He wasn't studying the aircraft. He was studying Amelia Brooks' financial records. Because in his experience, when a tragedy involves enormous wealth, the money often tells a story before the people do. Thomas discovered something that immediately caught his attention. Just weeks before the wedding, Jonathan Brooks had privately consulted estate attorneys. He wanted to understand what would happen if a billionaire spouse died before updating certain financial and inheritance documents. The conversation wasn't against the law. People ask estate planning questions every day. But the timing, coming just before the wedding, and only weeks before the fatal honeymoon flight, made investigators pause. Jonathan had never mentioned those meetings. As detectives expanded their investigation, phone records revealed another surprise. Jonathan Brooks and charter company CEO Charles Bennett had exchanged several phone calls before the honeymoon was ever booked. There was nothing illegal about speaking. But when both men were interviewed, neither mentioned those conversations. Not once. Investigators now had two unanswered questions. Why were those calls omitted? And what was important enough to keep hidden? The story begins to crack. Individually, none of the discoveries proved a crime. But together, they formed a pattern investigators could no longer ignore. For the first time, the possibility emerged that Amelia Brooks hadn't simply boarded an unlucky flight. She may have stepped into a plan that had been quietly unfolding long before her honeymoon ever began. The investigation takes a dark turn. Weeks into the investigation, digital forensic specialists recovered company messages that someone had tried to erase from the charter firm's internal servers. The conversations weren't complete, but they exposed something investigators had never been told. Jonathan Brooks and CEO Charles Bennett had met privately several times before the honeymoon. Those meetings never appeared on official schedules. Neither man had mentioned them during questioning. Now detectives wanted to know why. The missing business meeting. Investigators then examined Jonathan's phone records, calendar entries, and office security footage. The emergency business meeting that supposedly pulled him off the aircraft couldn't be verified. There was no conference room reservation. No client had requested an urgent meeting. No employees remembered seeing him attend one. Little by little, the story Jonathan had repeated to reporters began falling apart. The motive comes into focus. Financial investigators uncovered another crucial discovery. Following Amelia's death, Jonathan stood to inherit control of a substantial portion of her billion-dollar estate under the existing legal arrangements. Suddenly, the unanswered estate planning questions, the unexplained phone calls, the secret meetings, And the last-minute departure from the aircraft no longer looked like unrelated events. They appeared to be connected. Nothing looked accidental anymore. Detectives gathered in the evidence room and laid every discovery side by side. Each piece alone raised suspicion. Together, they painted a chilling picture. What had begun as a devastating aviation disaster was rapidly becoming a criminal investigation. For the first time, investigators seriously considered the possibility that Amelia Brooks hadn't been the victim of fate. She may have been the target of a carefully planned murder. Weeks of forensic analysis finally brought investigators closer than ever to the truth. The weather had been nearly perfect. The pilot had followed standard procedures. The aircraft had been properly maintained. One by one, the most obvious explanations disappeared. Yet something still refused to make sense. Forensic specialists discovered several irregularities within a critical aircraft system. They weren't ready to call it sabotage. Not yet. But they agreed on one thing. What they found could not be explained by ordinary wear, pilot error, or routine mechanical failure. Someone still wasn't telling the whole story. Jonathan's story begins to collapse. Investigators turned their attention back to Jonathan Brooks. This time, sympathy was replaced by scrutiny. Cell phone records placed Jonathan near the charter company's private maintenance hangar shortly before the honeymoon flight. Security footage captured him entering an area he had previously insisted he had never visited. Then detectives uncovered the one detail that changed everything. The urgent business meeting Jonathan claimed had forced him off the aircraft never existed. The client denied arranging any meeting. The conference room had never been reserved. The supposed emergency phone call had come from a prepaid phone with no legitimate business connection. The husband, who had appeared to be the tragic survivor, was suddenly becoming the center of the investigation. Charles Bennett runs out of answers. Investigators confronted charter company CEO Charles Bennett once again. This time, they brought evidence. He denied authorizing unusual flight changes. Company records proved he had. He denied private meetings with Jonathan. Security footage showed otherwise. Phone logs confirmed repeated conversations. Financial records revealed transactions investigators couldn't ignore. With every contradiction, Charles's credibility crumbled. Investigators compared the forensic findings with the growing collection of phone records, surveillance footage, company documents, financial records, and witness statements. For the first time, everything fit together. The unexplained irregularities inside the aircraft, Jonathan's fabricated business emergency, Charles Bennett's hidden involvement, the altered flight arrangements. They were no longer isolated discoveries. They were pieces of the same plan. Taken together, the forensic findings and the growing body of evidence led investigators to believe the aircraft had been intentionally sabotaged before departure. The honeymoon flight had not ended because of an unavoidable accident. Evidence now indicated that the aircraft had been intentionally sabotaged before departure. The man Amelia trusted with her future had become the prime suspect in taking it away. Justice at last. Months after the crash, investigators presented the evidence they had spent countless hours assembling. The altered flight records, the fabricated business meeting, the hidden financial motive, the undisclosed meetings between Jonathan Brooks and Charles Bennett, the tampered aircraft system. Standing alone, each discovery raised difficult questions. Together, they painted the picture prosecutors believed they had been searching for from the very beginning. According to prosecutors, Amelia Brooks' honeymoon had never been planned as a celebration. It had been designed as the perfect opportunity to make her disappearance look like a tragic aviation accident. The verdict. After weeks of testimony, forensic evidence, financial records, and witness statements, the jury reached its decision. Jonathan Brooks was found guilty. Charles Bennett was found guilty. The courtroom fell silent as both men were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. The husband Amelia trusted with her future had become the man responsible for taking it away. The charter company executive who was supposed to ensure passengers reached their destinations safely had instead helped conceal a deadly conspiracy. Justice had finally caught up with them. Amelia's legacy lives on. But there was one thing greed could never steal. Long before her honeymoon, Amelia had built a legacy far greater than wealth. Her charitable foundation continued paying for life-saving medical treatments. Scholarships she created continued helping students chase dreams they once believed were impossible. Communities she quietly supported continued receiving the help she had promised them. The fortune Jonathan believed he would one day control never became his. Instead, it continued changing lives exactly as Amelia had always intended. A legacy that could never be destroyed. In the end, greed destroyed the lives of the people who chose it. But it could not erase the compassion Amelia Brooks left behind. Justice could never bring her back. But it ensured that the truth survived. And that the people responsible would never escape it. Because sometimes, the perfect crime only appears perfect until someone refuses to stop asking questions. The truth always matters. If you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe to The Veil of Secret for more gripping true crime stories where hidden lies, shocking betrayals, and carefully buried secrets are finally brought into the light.